Evan Riker's hoverbike sputtered and groaned as it crawled over the endless red dunes of Tarak 7. The twin suns hung low, burning the sky into a harsh orange glow, and the wind carried fine sand that cut his skin like tiny knives. He had been stranded for 2 days now, alone, without any sign of rescue. Every ration, every drop of water felt like a treasure slipping through his fingers. Even the hum of his hoverbike's engine sounded like a desperate plea in the silence. He pushed the machine to its limits, scanning the horizon for shelter, for anything that might break the monotony of the desert. The terrain was merciless. Every dune looked the same, every shadow a possible threat. Evan's heart pounded not just from exhaustion but from the nagging sense that something was watching him. In a place this vast and empty, that feeling should have been impossible. That night, he huddled behind a jagged rock, using the remains of the hoverbike's canopy for cover. Sleep was impossible. The desert was alive with shifting sands, distant rumbles, and an eerie silence that pressed down on his mind. As he wrapped his jacket tighter, a faint noise caught his attention, a soft, pitiful whine, almost like a child crying. Evan froze. He scanned the area with his makeshift torch, the beam flickering across the dunes. At first he saw nothing. Then a shimmer in the moonlight revealed movement, a small figure crawling between rocks, leaving tiny, strange prints in the sand. Heart hammering, he stepped closer. The creature was small, scaly, and trembling. Its wings were folded too tightly against its body, glinting faintly as if made of glass. Its eyes were enormous, filled with fear, but also a strange intelligence that made Evan pause. He crouched slowly, careful not to frighten it further. "Hey, it's okay," he whispered, though he doubted the words would mean anything to a creature from another world. The creature flinched but didn't run. Its tiny chest rose and fell rapidly, shivering despite the heat of the day and the chill of the night. Evan's stomach twisted at the sight. Alone, defenseless, lost, he knew the feeling all too well. He searched his bag and pulled out the last of his emergency rations, offering them to the creature. It sniffed cautiously before nibbling, wings twitching. Evan smiled faintly, a warmth spreading through his chest despite the cold sand. For a moment he forgot his own troubles. Saving this creature, helping it survive, gave him a purpose bigger than his own life. As the night deepened, he realized the creature was not alone. Another whine, then another, 2 more small shapes emerged from the shadows. Evan's heart leapt. These were not random desert animals. These were dragon hatchlings, all 3 of them trembling, injured, and clearly in danger. Their scales bore strange markings, almost like insignias, etched into their skin in patterns he couldn't understand. He didn't know the species, didn't know the world they came from, but he recognized one thing clearly: they were special, important. The desert grew colder as he tried to set up a temporary shelter. Using spare panels from the hoverbike and the rocks around him, he built a makeshift windbreak. He managed to set up a small water condenser, the drip of clean water hitting the metal basin like a soft promise. The hatchlings clustered together, trusting him enough to allow him to brush sand from their wings. Evan worked through the night, repairing what little he could, feeding them and murmuring encouragements. He couldn't stop thinking about how fragile they were, and how fast the desert could kill them if he failed. By dawn, Evan's body ached, his lips cracked, and his eyes burned from sleeplessness. Yet, when he looked at the hatchlings, he felt something he hadn't felt in days: hope. They were alive, breathing, staring at him with eyes that seemed to understand gratitude. But the relief was short-lived. The desert was not done testing them. A distant rumble, faint at first, then growing louder, made Evan's heart sink. The ground vibrated beneath him, and a plume of dust rose over the dunes. Something massive was moving toward them. Predators? Raiders? Or worse, a storm of sand and rock from the unstable desert terrain? Evan's mind raced. He could barely keep himself alive, yet now he was responsible for 3 alien hatchlings. Every choice, every action mattered. He grabbed the hatchlings carefully, wrapping them in his jacket, and scanned the horizon. There was nowhere to run, only forward and into the unknown. The desert had given him a challenge bigger than himself, and he would meet it. Somehow he would survive, and so would they. As the first streaks of sunlight cut through the dunes, Evan Riker's determination hardened. The desert was vast, merciless, and alive with danger, but he was human. He had courage, skill, and heart. And he would not fail. Then, just as he adjusted the hatchlings in his arms, a shadow flickered across the sand, something much larger than any creature he had seen before. It moved with purpose, and Evan knew instinctively it was coming for them. His pulse spiked, adrenaline surged, and for the first time in days, fear and resolve mingled into a single, sharp focus. The desert silence had ended, and the real test was beginning. Evan's eyes locked on the shadow racing across the dunes, its shape distorted by wind and sand. His grip on the hatchlings tightened. Whatever it was, it moved fast, too fast for a normal desert predator. He had no weapons, only his wits, a battered hoverbike and a desperate need to survive. The shadow surged closer. Evan could make out jagged wings, glinting like shards of metal under the twin sun's early light. His breath hitched. The hatchlings shivered in his arms, tiny claws gripping his jacket. Panic clawed at him, but he shoved it down. Panic killed more than desert storms. He scanned the rocks nearby, calculating. If he could lead it into the narrow crevice canyon, its size would slow it down, maybe give them a chance to escape. He moved quickly, sand slipping underfoot, the hatchlings squirming in alarm. The creature roared, a deep, resonant sound that shook the dunes, and Evan realized it was not a predator hunting for food. The sound carried intelligence, authority. It was tracking the hatchlings. Suddenly, understanding hit him. The hatchlings weren't just random survivors. They were the last of their kind, and something, or someone, knew it. Before he could react further, the ground trembled violently. A sandslide roared down the nearest dune, narrowly missing them. Evan stumbled, nearly dropping the hatchlings. He caught them just in time, his heart hammering in his chest. The desert was alive, unpredictable. Survival meant moving fast, thinking faster. He darted toward a narrow rock channel, the only place that might offer cover. Behind him, the massive winged shadow followed, its movement precise, deliberate. Evan had no idea if it was friendly or hostile, but he couldn't take chances. His mind raced. The hoverbike was useless here, the sand would bog it down instantly. He had to rely on his own legs, his ingenuity, his human determination. Sweat stung his eyes, sand filled his mouth, and the hatchlings whimpered, sensing the tension. Evan's pulse drove him onward. Every step was a calculation. Where to place his feet, how to balance the creatures in his arms, how to anticipate the next tremor or sandslide. He thought of all the things he knew about mechanics, leverage, balance, and timing, applying them instinctively to this life-or-death dash. Humans had survived worse, hadn't they? Evan refused to let fear paralyze him. Finally he reached the crevice. It was barely wide enough to move through, but enough to force the winged creature to slow. Evan ducked, pressing the hatchlings against his chest. The creature roared again, wings scraping the rock walls, sand flying. Evan counted heartbeats, 1, 2, 3, and then leaped over a small fissure in the rock. The hatchlings yelped but held on, trusting him completely. That trust, fragile and precious, fueled him. The crevice narrowed, twisting in ways that would have trapped a mechanical vehicle. Evan's mind raced as he looked for solutions. Using fragments of broken rock and debris from the canyon walls, he fashioned a simple barrier, a wedge that could tip if pressure was applied. He set it aside, hoping the creature would trigger it if it followed too closely. It did. A massive claw caught the edge of the rock wedge. Sand and debris tumbled down, striking the creature and forcing it to retreat just long enough for Evan to sprint deeper into the canyon. He exhaled shakily, his legs trembling from the strain, but the hatchlings were safe. For now. The narrow canyon opened into a small basin, shielded from wind and sand. Evan collapsed onto the ground, setting the hatchlings down carefully. They huddled together, wings trembling, breathing shallow and fast. He checked each one. Minor scratches, a bruise or two, but no life-threatening injuries. Relief and exhaustion washed over him, mingling with a gnawing anxiety. The desert wasn't done testing them, not by a long shot. As he tended to the hatchlings, Evan noticed something that made his stomach tighten. Faint tracks in the sand. They weren't from the creature. They were humanoid, deliberate, cautious. Someone else was here. Raiders? Mercenaries? The thought sent a jolt of fear through him. He couldn't fight them with weapons. He didn't even have a plan yet. But he did have his mind, his creativity, and the one thing no alien could ever predict: human cunning. Evan rose slowly, scanning the horizon. The twin suns now burned high, the heat rippling across the basin. He calculated paths, escape routes, and improvisations, how to hide, how to defend, how to survive. The desert was merciless, but humans were adaptable. He could make tools, set traps, think faster than anyone expected. The hatchlings stirred beside him, sensing his resolve. One of them, the smallest, nuzzled against his chest. Evan felt a sharp surge of emotion: fear, responsibility, determination, and something else: hope. He was not just surviving for himself anymore. He was their protector. And he would not fail. A sudden gust of wind carried a new sound, metal clinking over sand, faint but deliberate. Evan stiffened. Raiders or something far worse were closing in. He grabbed a shard of rock, improvising a weapon, and pulled the hatchlings close. There was no turning back. The desert had tested him, pushed him to the edge, and now it demanded a choice: hide and hope or act and survive. Evan's jaw set. He chose action. With the hatchlings in his arms, he moved silently toward a series of jagged rocks that could offer cover, every step measured, every breath controlled. Behind him, the shadow from before shifted, larger, slower, but still aware, still waiting. The desert's trials were far from over. And then, just as he reached the first protective rocks, a deafening roar split the air. The ground shook again, and Evan realized the desert's next challenge had arrived. Something bigger, smarter, and more dangerous than anything he had faced so far. His pulse surged. He tightened his grip on the hatchlings and whispered, "We survive, together." The desert held its breath, and Evan Riker prepared to face the impossible. Evan pressed himself and the hatchlings against the jagged rocks, catching his breath. The roar had faded, but his pulse wouldn't. The desert was alive with threats, some natural, some unknown, and he had no way to predict which would strike next. He scanned the horizon. No sign of the massive winged creature, only endless dunes and the glint of the early sun. But Evan knew better than to relax. On Tarak 7, survival demanded constant vigilance. He set the hatchlings down carefully. They huddled together, shivering but alert, wings twitching like fragile glass in the morning light. Evan studied them. There was something remarkable about these creatures. The way their scales refracted sunlight, the subtle pulses of energy under their skin. They weren't just surviving, they were alive in a way he had never seen before. Somehow he knew they could do more than breathe and move. His mind raced. If he could understand the way they generated energy pulses, maybe he could use it. The desert had forced him to improvise before, rigging a makeshift barrier, dodging massive predators, surviving with minimal resources. Now he had living, breathing power sources at his fingertips. He would need courage, intelligence, and precision to harness it without hurting them. Using fragments of the hoverbike and broken rocks, Evan constructed a small platform. He rigged thin wires from the hatchling's resting spot to the hoverbike's energy core. The goal was simple in theory: capture and amplify the hatchling's natural energy pulses to power the bike's navigation systems. If he succeeded, they could move faster, cover more ground, and perhaps even escape the desert entirely. But the risk was enormous. One mistake, one miscalculation, and the hatchlings could be injured. "Trust me," he whispered, his voice low but steady. They stared at him, eyes wide and intelligent. It wasn't fear, they seemed to understand the intent behind his words. Evan smiled briefly, heart swelling with a mixture of awe and responsibility. He adjusted the wires carefully, calibrating them to pick up the faint pulses beneath their scales. Then he waited. A small flicker passed through the smallest hatchling. A pulse. Evan's hands moved quickly, linking it to the makeshift circuit. The bike's core hummed faintly. Another pulse, stronger this time, and the hum grew louder. The hatchlings began to synchronize, tiny beats forming a rhythm that resonated through the wires. Evan leaned back, amazed. The desert had handed him a miracle, but one that demanded mastery. Hours passed as he worked. Sandstorms kicked up, rattling the platform and threatening to tear the wires free. Each time, Evan ducked, retied, and adjusted, sweat and sand mixing on his skin. The hatchlings remained calm, sensing his determination, their trust growing. It was an alliance born of necessity, but also of mutual respect. Humans survived by ingenuity, these creatures survived by instinct. Together they could achieve something neither could alone. By midday Evan had done it. The hoverbike's engine thrummed with a new power source, fueled by the hatchling's energy pulses. He tested it carefully, lifting a few inches off the sand. The hatchlings chirped, almost in excitement, and Evan laughed, the sound raw and full of relief. It wasn't just a machine anymore, it was a partnership, a symbiosis of human engineering and alien life. But celebration was brief. Movement at the canyon's mouth caught his attention. Zyran raiders, humanoid scavengers notorious for capturing rare creatures, had spotted them. Evan's stomach dropped. There was no time to hide. The desert offered no cover that could withstand their energy nets. He had to act. He remembered the wires and pulses. If he could amplify them in a burst, the energy might create a temporary shield, a blinding flash to confuse the raiders. Evan quickly adjusted the connections, warning the hatchlings with a low, calm murmur. The pulse came through stronger than expected, and the desert lit up in a flickering aura of energy. Sand swirled violently, catching the raiders off guard. Their nets fell short, tangled in the sudden turbulence. Evan seized the moment. He leapt onto the hoverbike, clutching the hatchlings, and the device lifted, powered by the synchronized pulses. The raiders shouted, weapons firing, but the combination of his skill, the desert's natural obstacles, and the hatchlings' power kept them just out of reach. Evan's heart pounded, but he focused on precision, altitude, speed, trajectory. Humans survived because they could think faster than their enemies. He wasn't about to fail now. The canyon walls narrowed, forcing the hoverbike into careful maneuvering. Evan gritted his teeth, dodging jagged rocks while keeping the hatchlings safe. One miscalculation would mean disaster. He remembered lessons from years of repairing engines, balancing circuits, improvising under impossible conditions. Every instinct, every ounce of knowledge, every bit of courage counted. Finally, they cleared the canyon and emerged onto a plateau. The desert stretched endlessly, but Evan saw the glimmer of hope in the distance. The faint outline of the Tarak 7 Royal Archives, a floating citadel glowing in the sunlight. The hatchlings pulsed gently in his arms, their energy steady, almost proud. Evan allowed himself a moment to breathe. They were alive, stronger, and together. But the desert was not done. Far below, a dust cloud rose on the horizon, moving faster than any sandstorm should. The Zyran raiders were regrouping, relentless in pursuit. Evan tightened his grip on the controls, jaw set. Survival wasn't just about skill, it was about courage, intelligence, and refusing to give in. The plateau ended in a sheer drop, cliffs falling into a deep chasm. Evan scanned for a path, for any way forward, his mind racing faster than the hoverbike thrummed beneath him. Every decision now could mean life or death, not just for him but for the hatchlings. They had trusted him, relied on him, and he could not fail. He took a deep breath, letting determination steady him. "We keep moving," he whispered, eyes locked on the horizon. "We survive, and we get them home." The desert wind howled around him, sand whipping against his face. Shadows stretched across the plateau. Something larger than any predator moved in the distance, a reminder that Tarak 7 was alive with danger. But Evan Riker, human, mechanic, survivor, would not falter. With courage, ingenuity, and heart he would face whatever came next. And in that moment he understood the truth, the hatchling's survival, and perhaps the fate of a lineage he didn't yet fully understand, depended on him. The chase was far from over. Evan gritted his teeth as the hoverbike skimmed the plateau, sand whipping past like tiny blades. The dust cloud on the horizon grew larger, the Zyran raiders relentless. Their energy nets could immobilize anything, and Evan knew he had mere seconds to act before they reached his position. The hatchlings clung to him, wings vibrating faintly as if they sensed the danger as acutely as he did. He scanned the terrain. Ahead, jagged cliffs rose sharply, jagged edges forming a treacherous canyon path. Too narrow for the raiders' larger craft to follow. His pulse spiked. This was his chance, but the canyon was unforgiving. One misstep, one miscalculation, and they could plummet to their deaths. "Okay, think," he muttered, adjusting the hoverbike stabilizers. Every moment counted. The hatchlings pulsed with energy, the rhythm steady now, almost as if encouraging him. Evan realized he could amplify the pulses in a sudden burst, enough to create a blinding flash and temporary disruption to the raiders' sensors. The risk was high, overcharge the pulses and the hatchlings could be harmed. Undercharge and they would be captured. But Evan trusted his calculations, his instincts, and the creature's natural abilities. Humans survived impossible odds by taking smart risks. He hit the control link. A surge of energy raced through the hoverbike, magnified by the hatchlings' pulses. Light exploded around them, sand spinning violently in a miniature whirlwind. The raiders swore and staggered as their systems glitched, energy nets collapsing uselessly around them. Evan pushed forward, hoverbike darting toward the cliffs, the hatchlings chirping, wings flexing against him. The canyon narrowed sharply, forcing precise navigation. He dodged jagged rock formations, feeling the vibrations underfoot, calculating momentum and trajectory. One hatchling shifted slightly, sending an uneven pulse that jolted the hoverbike. Evan's heart leapt. "Hold steady," he whispered, steadying the craft with the last ounce of his strength. The creatures responded instinctively, aligning their pulses with his movements. It was an alliance, a true partnership born of desperation and trust. Halfway through, the canyon constricted further, the cliffs towering like walls of red glass. A sudden tremor shook the plateau, dislodging a boulder that crashed toward them. Evan reacted instantly, leaning sharply and using the hoverbike's thrusters to vault over it. A small hatchling screeched but held on, wings fluttering wildly. His heart pounded in his chest. Every instinct, every lesson from years of repairing machines, every ounce of courage mattered now. One wrong move could end it all. As they cleared the obstacle, the raiders regrouped below. Smaller craft maneuvered cautiously, trying to flank the canyon entrance. Evan's mind raced. He had no weapons that could reach them from above, no time for conventional tactics. But he had the hatchlings, and their pulses could be more than energy, they could be weaponized defensively. Carefully he adjusted the amplifier, directing pulses outward in controlled bursts. Sparks shot from the hoverbike's hull, creating blinding flashes that disoriented the raiders while simultaneously destabilizing their engines. The raiders faltered, their formation breaking. Evan seized the moment, accelerating through the narrowing path, the canyon walls scraping close. One misjudged movement, one bump against a rock could have been fatal, but he moved with precision, skill, and unwavering focus. The hatchlings pulsed in harmony, wings flexing in response to his commands, an unspoken bond of life and trust guiding them forward. Finally, the canyon opened to a plateau overlooking a vast chasm. Across the divide, the glowing outline of the Tarak 7 Royal Archives shimmered in the sunlight. Evan's pulse surged, hope fighting through exhaustion. The hatchlings chirped in excitement, energy flowing stronger now, ready to give the last boost needed for the final leap. But the desert's challenges were not finished. From below, a massive shadow emerged, larger than any raider, moving with deliberate intelligence. It was the winged creature from the first night, and it had been waiting. Evan realized too late that this was not a simple predator, it was a sentinel tracking the hatchlings. Its wings spanned the canyon, and every flap of air sent loose rocks tumbling. Escape without confrontation seemed impossible. Evan's mind raced. He had survived storms, sand, and raiders, but this required ingenuity at the highest level. He adjusted the hoverbike, calculating the precise angle for the jump across the chasm. One hatchling shifted nervously, another emitted a sudden pulse. Evan synchronized the bursts, amplifying their energy in perfect timing with the hoverbike's thrusters. The liftoff was instantaneous. Rocks scraped the hoverbike's hull as they soared into the air, the hatchling's pulses providing a surge that carried them across the gap. The winged sentinel lunged from below, but Evan's trajectory was flawless. The combined force of human ingenuity and alien energy carried them safely to the far edge. The chasm yawned behind them, the raiders and sentinel left far below, unable to follow. Evan exhaled shakily, sweat dripping from his brow. The hatchlings nestled closer, wings trembling but steady. He allowed himself a brief smile, relief coursing through him, but he knew the danger was far from over. The Royal Archives awaited, and their journey was only half complete. Survival had required courage, intelligence, and decisive action, but trust in both himself and the hatchlings had made the difference. Evan glanced at the glowing citadel in the distance, knowing the final challenge would test everything he had learned. For now, though, they had survived the desert's deadliest trial, and he had proven, in the harshest crucible imaginable, that humans could overcome the impossible. A faint pulse of light from one of the hatchlings caught his eye, an instinctive warning. Something was moving atop the far cliffs. Evan's jaw tightened. The desert had given them a reprieve, but the real confrontation, one that could determine the fate of the hatchlings and the alien lineage, was coming next. He tightened his grip on the controls, heart steady, mind sharp. Together, human and hatchlings would face the storm ahead. And this time, failure was not an option. Evan Riker's hoverbike hummed steadily as they neared the glowing outline of the Tarak 7 Royal Archives. The hatchlings, once fragile and trembling, now pulsed with controlled energy, their wings flaring in synchronization with the bike's thrusters. Each beat of their tiny hearts sent a rhythm through the machine, a living bond that Evan had nurtured through nights of danger, exhaustion, and improvisation. He had become more than a mechanic. He was a guardian, a strategist, and a partner in an alliance that crossed species, worlds, and the impossible odds of the desert. The plateau before the archives opened into a wide basin, shimmering with alien light. Evan's eyes scanned the scene. Tall, floating towers marked the citadel, each adorned with symbols etched in the scales of dragons long past. Energy fields shimmered along the edges, signaling sentries and defense systems that were active, intelligent, and watchful. One misstep, one misunderstanding, and they could attack him, thinking he was a threat. But Evan did not falter. He had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, it was action despite it. A distant hum approached. He spotted figures moving along the citadel walkways, alien guards in luminous armor. They stopped when they saw the hatchlings, wings spread and bodies glowing faintly. The tallest figure descended, suspended by levitation technology, moving toward Evan with calm authority. Its skin shimmered like polished stone, eyes deep pools of light. Evan realized immediately that this was the prince, the ruler of the lineage the hatchlings belonged to. Every instinct in his body told him to stay calm, to let the creatures sense his intent. The prince stopped just a few meters away, examining Evan and the hatchlings. He tilted his head slightly, observing, assessing, but not hostile. Evan held his breath, unsure if his actions would be met with gratitude or judgment. He had saved lives, yes, but from the perspective of a civilization far older and more advanced, perhaps he had overstepped boundaries. Then a soft vibration ran through the smallest hatchling. It chirped and stepped forward, extending a wing toward Evan. The prince's expression changed subtly, a recognition passing through its luminous eyes. A moment of silence stretched, broken only by the hum of the archive's energy fields. Evan realized that the prince was not only acknowledging his courage, but also understanding something deeper, that a human had preserved what the galaxy deemed precious, that determination and morality could bridge worlds. "You have done what few would dare," the prince's voice resonated in Evan's mind, carried telepathically or by some advanced translation field. "These hatchlings are the last of their line. You saved them when even the deserts themselves sought to destroy all life here. For that, you are honored." Evan exhaled, relief mingling with fatigue. He set the hatchlings down carefully, letting them step forward into the prince's energy field. They chirped softly, wings flexing, seemingly recognizing their lineage again. The prince reached out, gently touching the hatchling's scales, the symbols lighting up in response. Evan watched, heart full. His choices, his courage, and his ingenuity had not only kept them alive, they had restored hope to a lineage that could influence the fate of entire worlds. The prince turned to Evan, eyes glowing with faint approval. "You are more than a visitor, human. You have proven that courage, intelligence, and determination are not limited to one species. You have reminded us why humans are valued in the galaxy." Evan shook his head, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I didn't do it for honor," he said simply. "I did it because it was right. Because they couldn't survive without someone willing to risk everything." The prince inclined its head. "And that is exactly why you will be remembered." With a gesture, a platform descended, offering Evan a place within the archives, not as a servant or soldier but as a guardian and ally. Artifacts of alien technology, records of advanced engineering, and knowledge of the desert's secrets lay before him, but he barely glanced. His reward was more profound. Trust, respect, and the bond with the hatchlings, creatures whose lives he had preserved against impossible odds. As he prepared to leave the archives for a brief journey back to Earth, the hatchlings circled him. They pulsed gently, a rhythm he now recognized as communication, a soft acknowledgement of their gratitude and trust. Evan knelt, letting the smallest nuzzle against his shoulder. He had not only survived the desert, raiders, and unknown predators, he had built an alliance that could change the future. The desert lay behind him now, a place that had tested everything he was. Each trial, the storms, the rocks, the predators, the sand, and even the Zyran raiders, had demanded courage, intellect, and moral resolve. And he had met it all. Humans were fragile, yes, but also relentless, adaptive, and capable of extraordinary feats when necessity demanded. He had proven it not with weapons, not with force, but with ingenuity, determination, and heart. As the hoverbike lifted into the skies above Tarak 7, Evan looked down at the desert stretching endlessly below. The red sand seemed quieter now, less hostile, almost reverent. He had left footprints, yes, but more than that, he had left a mark of courage, a legacy of human resilience. The hatchlings chirped, and Evan understood, they would carry the story of him and the human who risked everything for life, far beyond this world, far beyond the desert. For the first time in days, Evan allowed himself to relax. The twin suns reflected off the hatchling's scales, painting the sky in molten light. He smiled softly, thinking of the impossible odds they had overcome together. One human, 3 hatchlings, and the desert that sought to claim them all. And yet here they were, alive, thriving, and on the brink of changing the galaxy. The prince's voice echoed one final time in his mind, "You are human. That alone is reason enough to hope." Evan nodded, heart steady, eyes bright. He had survived the desert, outsmarted predators, defended the helpless, and proven that humanity's courage, intelligence, and morality could shine against any darkness. And the world, or worlds, would remember. The desert's silence returned, but its echo carried one unmistakable truth: humans mattered.